birth of Jesus was celebrated in the early church was in December 25th. And why then? There's been a number of reasons given. I think part of it has to do with the symbology of the solstice. You're like, what does that mean? The solstice means this. You notice how it gets darker and darker? You know, it's like it's 4 o'clock and already the sun is setting. You know, well, that's because during winter, the way that the Earth is tilted towards the sunlight, we get less sunlight in North America during this time. If you go to Australia, it's just the opposite. Their days are longer. Okay, it's their summer while it's our winter. So it has to do with the tilt of the Earth. And I would say that part of this has to do with on December 20th will be the shortest day of the year.
Or is that
no.
over there?
No.
I thought it was St. Lucy's.
No. December 20th or 21st, depending on how it lands, is what's called the winter solstice. It's the shortest day of the year. We'll have the least amount of sunlight and the longest time of night. Now, that's a perfect symbolism of Jesus' birth. Why? In the darkest time of the year, at midnight, the darkest time of the night, deep in the darkness, who is born? Jesus, the light of the world. It's beautiful symbolism. It's beautiful symbolism. Because after December 20th or 21st, the days slowly start to get longer until we hit spring. And then in March 20th, 21st, we had equal day and night. Equal day and night. It's called the vernal equinox. The day and night are equal. After March 20th, guess what happens?
Longer summer.
Our days get longer until we reach June 20th, summer solstice. On that, we have more daylight and very little night. It's the longest day of the year. When we mean longest, it means the most amount of daylight as perceived in the Western Hemisphere. And by the way, the more northern you go, the more daylight you get during the summer. So if you go above the Arctic Circle, you have the land of the midnight sun. The sun never sets for 6 months of the year. It never sets. And after that, guess what? The sun never rises for 6 months. So you're in darkness for 6 months and in full light for 6 months when you're at the Arctic Circle. And you can experience that if you go in Alaska. It's the land of the midnight sun, as they call it. Okay? So it has to do with your position above the equator, how you experience these times of the year. After summer, what happens? The days start getting shorter again, don't they? Until you hit September 22nd. And what is that? The autumnal equinox, when the day and night are at equal time. We get the same amount of sunlight as we get the same amount of night. And then what happens after that? The nights start getting longer and the days start getting... See, we don't experience this because we're so ruled by our clocks. And we have all of our electric lights. We turn day into night. You go to Las Vegas, the night never stops, right? We have no concept of this. The problem is, in ancient times, they were extremely aware of all of this. And in fact, pagan religion is all based on these 4 parts of our year. They honor each of these parts with certain pagan ceremonies. And the halfway marks in between them are all marked too in pagan calendars. So a pagan calendar is a circle with a cross through it, and the high points are the two solstices of the year, when the day and night is of equal length, and the solstice is when the day is the longest and the day is the shortest, because those are the most extremes, and the two periods in which the day and night are of equal length, the equinoxes. Okay? So in pagan calendar time, the new year begins in the spring with that equinox. And then the days get longer, then they go into equal, then they get shorter. And in a pagan calendar, that's where the idea of evergreens and boughs come in, because it's a sign of sympathetic magic, that even though everything is dying, all the leaves are gone, the ground is covered in snow, it looks like there's no life, the evergreens are just that, evergreen, and gives us hope that the sun will return and that life will come back again in the spring, and it does. So this is how pagans celebrate these seasons. So I believe one of the reasons that the church began celebrating in December is because of this sense of darkness that we are in. So in the deepest, darkest time of the year, who is born? The light of the world, the King of glory. And I think that's why it happened, was to emphasize the symbolism of Jesus' birth. That's why I think we celebrate it in December and not April. Also, what happens in April? Easter. So we're going to celebrate Christmas and Easter at the same time? That's boring. It's boring. No. Let's have a celebration clear on the other end of the calendar. Clear on the other end of the calendar. No, we can't change Easter because we know when Jesus died. It was during the Feast of Passover. Passover is always celebrated in April, or late March. Anyone remember how Easter is defined by the church?
First Sunday after the full moon after the first spring.
That's correct. We had an entire church council to define when can we celebrate Easter. And the answer is this: the first Sunday after the first full moon after the first day of spring. So when is the first day of spring? March 21st. So once March 21st passes, the first full moon that you see, the next Sunday after that, that's Easter. That's why it keeps changing every year. You notice that? Sometimes it's like at the end of March, like it was last year. It was like March 28th, because because the full moon happened right after the first day of spring. So the first Sunday after that, guess what? That's Easter. So Easter was done by March.
First Sunday after the first full moon.
After the
First day of spring.
First day of spring.
Okay? This year, it's happening on, what is it, the 13th of April? I guarantee you,
11, 12.
the first full moon that you see in the night, watch it, will occur sometime before then. Before that Sunday, there'll be a full moon. Because that's why it always changes. Because the season of the moon in relationship to our current calendar is not in sync like it should. So that's why it constantly is changing. Christmas, on the other hand, it's just one day. It doesn't affect, who cares about the moon and all of that? But Easter always has to coincide with Passover. Why? Because that's when Jesus instituted the Eucharist. And how do we know that? Because our Gospels tell us that's how he did it. Jesus dies during the Feast of Passover. He is our Passover. And that's why it's constantly changing. I'm looking at the time, and I'm starting to lose my voice, I can tell. I was going to talk about St. Nicholas, who he was, the patron saint of children. And I was going to say, how did Santa Claus get invented out of St. Nicholas? Well, the short answer is, I believe it was like a game of telephone. Yeah, it began as Father Christmas, a bishop, and later, over time, with the help of L. Frank Baum, the writer of the Wizard of Oz series, he wrote something called The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus in 1902, which really laid the foundation of the modern mythology that we have of reindeer and elves, and Santa being this magical kind of character, completely different from St. Nicholas of the 4th century. St. Nicholas was a real person. St. Nicholas was a powerful saint. St. Nicholas was associated with miracles and helping the poor, much like Santa Claus is. But over the centuries, it has evolved into this magical figure living at the North Pole with elves and magic reindeer. That has nothing to do with St. Nicholas, the bishop of the 4th century. So maybe next year, if I get through the rest of it faster, we'll get to this. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and grant you peace. See you next week for our party.
Thank you.